In the late 19th century, the world stood on the edge of a technological revolution. Steam had reshaped industry, electricity was beginning to illuminate cities, and humanity looked toward the sky, wondering if flight, long imagined, long dismissed, might finally be possible. Among those who dared to challenge gravity itself, one name would rise above all others with a combination of curiosity, engineering brilliance, and relentless determination: Alberto Santos Dumont. To understand his journey, we must travel far before his achievements in Paris and explore the foundations that shaped the man who would later become known as the father of aviation. Santos Dumont was born in 1873 on a vast coffee plantation in the Brazilian countryside, a world filled with machines, workers, locomotives, and an environment where innovation was not merely encouraged, but necessary for survival. His father, Henrique Dumont, was a prosperous engineer-entrepreneur who oversaw one of the most advanced agricultural operations in Brazil. He brought modern machinery from Europe, implemented new industrial processes, and constantly improved efficiency through engineering solutions. For a young Santos Dumont, this environment served as a natural laboratory. Even as a child, he became fascinated with gears, engines, and mechanical devices. He spent hours observing the operation of steam tractors, analyzing every component. More importantly, his father allowed him to experiment freely, a level of freedom that would later define his inventive spirit. But beyond the machines themselves, the endless open skies of the Brazilian interior ignited his imagination. He observed birds in flight, hot air balloons at festivals, and descriptions of early aeronautical experiments in the books he devoured. Aviation at that time was still considered more fantasy than science. But to Santos Dumont, it represented an inevitable future. When he reached adulthood, his father suffered an accident that left him partially paralyzed. The family decided to leave Brazil and move to Europe so that Henrique could receive advanced medical treatment. Before departing, however, Henrique gave his son a final gift: financial independence, accompanied by a message that would shape Santos Dumont's destiny. He told him to follow his passion, wherever it might lead. For a young man already dreaming of conquering the skies, this was the final push he needed. Arriving in Paris in the early 1900s, Santos Dumont entered a city alive with intellectual energy. Paris was the capital of scientific innovation, home to inventors, engineers, and pioneering aeronauts. Balloon flights were frequent public spectacles, and aeronautical clubs hosted debates about the theoretical limits of flight. Yet even in this environment, many still believed real, controlled, powered flight was impossible. Balloons could float, but they could not be reliably directed. And heavier than air machines? Those were considered fantasies fit for science fiction novels. Dumont, however, approached the problem differently. Instead of beginning with airplanes, he focused first on dirigibles, lighter-than-air ships that used engines for propulsion. He believed that mastering control and stability in the air was a critical step toward creating a true flying machine. And unlike many wealthy hobbyists who treated aviation as a pastime, he dedicated himself entirely to the study of mechanics and engineering. He enrolled in courses, hired mechanics, and spent countless hours in workshops learning by doing. He built his first airship, simply named Santos Dumont No. 1, in 1908. The design was simple: a long, narrow balloon filled with hydrogen, supported by a small gasoline engine attached beneath it. The craft was fragile, and although his initial flights ended in minor accidents, his determination did not waver. What set him apart was not just his courage, but his willingness to publicly test his creations, often placing himself in great personal danger. These early experiments paved the way for his later breakthrough: a dirigible that could take off, fly a predetermined route, and land safely, a feat the world had not yet witnessed. In Paris, news of the young Brazilian aeronaut testing strange, elongated balloons in open fields quickly spread. While many saw him as eccentric, others recognized the spark of genius. Dumont was not only building machines, he was building credibility, challenge by challenge, failure by failure. By 1900, he had already completed designs for new airships, each incorporating lessons learned from previous attempts, and the city of Paris, which had once viewed aviation as entertainment, began to watch closely. Dumont was on the brink of transforming aviation forever. By the turn of the century, Santos Dumont had become a familiar figure in Parisian scientific circles. His small stature, wide-brimmed hats, and calm demeanor made him instantly recognizable. But it was his courage that truly captured public attention. Despite multiple crashes, technical failures, and dangerous hydrogen leaks, he never stopped refining his designs. In an era when most inventors worked behind closed doors, Santos Dumont performed his experiments openly, inviting journalists to witness both his triumphs and his failures. This transparency earned him admiration and, in time, respect. In 1901, the Aero Club de France announced a challenge that would become one of the defining moments of early aviation, the Deutsch Prize, named after industrialist Henry Deutsch de la Meurthe. The rules were straightforward, but extremely demanding. Any dirigible had to fly from Parc Saint-Cloud to the Eiffel Tower, circle it, and return to the starting point within 30 minutes. The distance was manageable, but the time limit required perfect control, speed, and stability. Many aviation enthusiasts considered the challenge impossible. But Dumont approached the problem differently. He began working on a new airship, the No. 5, designed specifically for the speed and maneuverability required for the Deutsch Prize. The balloon envelope was elongated and reinforced, and the gasoline engine beneath it was more powerful than any he had used before. To maximize efficiency, he meticulously reduced weight wherever possible, crafting a light aluminum gondola and optimizing the propeller design. Every component reflected a balance between minimalism and precision. On his first attempts, the No. 5 performed well until mechanical issues struck. One of the most dramatic failures occurred in August 1901 when the airship suddenly lost shape mid-flight. Hydrogen began to escape rapidly, and the entire craft sagged dangerously. Dumont tried to maneuver toward the rooftops to slow his fall, but the dirigible crashed into the gardens of the Trocadero. Though shackened and bruised, he survived, emerging from the wreckage determined to continue. This resilience only strengthened public fascination. Newspapers described him as the man who refuses to fall, and crowds gathered whenever he prepared a flight. Determined to win the prize, he set to work rebuilding the No. 5. Engineers and mechanics assisted him, but his own hands were always the first and last to touch every component. He understood the machine intimately, its limits, its strengths, its delicate balance in the air. Finally, on October 19, 1901, conditions were perfect. The sky was calm, and the winds, though present, were manageable. Santos Dumont boarded the No. 5, waved to the crowd, and rose into the air. The dirigible moved steadily toward the Eiffel Tower, its engine humming evenly. Spectators watched with increasing excitement as he circled the tower, a breathtaking sight in a city that had never seen controlled flight executed with such confidence. But as he turned back toward Saint-Cloud, time was running dangerously low. The return trajectory faced unexpected wind resistance, slowing his progress. Observers below grew anxious. Some believed he would miss the deadline by seconds. As the airship approached the finish line, the engine sputtered. With remarkable calm, Santos Dumont maintained control, guiding the No. 5 back to the starting point just as the 30-minute limit expired. A debate immediately erupted among the judges regarding the precise timing, but after deliberation, the verdict was announced. Santos Dumont had completed the challenge successfully. He became the first person in history to prove that a powered, steerable flying machine could navigate a specific route and return safely, a milestone that moved aviation from dream to reality. The victory earned him the 100,000 franc Deutsch Prize, which he donated almost entirely to his workers and to the poor of Paris. To him, recognition mattered far more than money. International newspapers hailed him as a visionary, and crowds followed him through the streets to celebrate. The feat made him one of the most famous inventors in the world. Yet Santos Dumont was not finished. Success with dirigibles was only the beginning. While lighter-than aircraft offered stability and endurance, he believed the future of aviation would ultimately depend on heavier-than-air flight, true airplanes capable of sustained, powered flight. He had conquered the skies with balloons and engines, now he sought to conquer them with wings. And so in the years following his triumph, he shifted his focus to the next great challenge, designing the machine that would forever redefine human flight.
After his celebrated success with dirigibles, Santos Dumont found himself at a crossroads. He had demonstrated to the world that controlled flight was possible, but he knew instinctively that lighter-than-air machines were only a temporary step in the evolution of aviation. The future, he believed, belonged to machines that could rise from the ground using wings and engines. Machines that resembled birds not in appearance but in principle. And so, around 1902, he began a radical shift in focus, designing heavier-than-air aircraft. At this time, the idea of an airplane was still deeply controversial. Engineers argued about the very fundamentals of lift, stability, and propulsion. Some claimed that flight would require enormous wings and engines far more powerful than anything then available. Others insisted that human flight was simply impossible, a dream that would collapse under the weight of nature's laws. But Santos Dumont approached the problem with the same mixture of curiosity and daring that had defined his entire career. He did not treat the airplane as a distant ideal. He treated it as an engineering problem waiting to be solved. His early experiments centered on small gliders and lightweight structures. He studied aerodynamics obsessively, reading scientific papers, observing birds, and conducting practical tests. He believed that an airplane should be simple, elegant, and efficient, qualities that would become trademarks of his later designs. By 1906, after countless trials, redesigns, and mechanical tests, Santos Dumont introduced the machine that would change history, the 14 bis, also known as oiseau de proie, bird of prey. Unlike any aircraft before it, the 14 bis stood as a true flying machine, a biplane with a box kite structure, balanced by a forward control surface and powered by a lightweight internal combustion engine. It had wheels, not rails or launch systems, meaning it could take off from the ground under its own power. This detail, simple on the surface, would later become critical. The 14 bis drew immediate attention. Parisian crowds flocked to see the strange contraption sitting in the field at Bagatelle, its long wings and cubic frame giving it an almost surreal appearance. Observers wondered if this fragile machine could truly fly. Many expected another crash, another headline, another dramatic twist in the saga of the eccentric Brazilian aviator. But Santos Dumont did not hesitate. He climbed aboard, adjusted his controls, and prepared for the attempt. On the afternoon of October 23, 1906, history unfolded. The engine roared, the aircraft vibrated. The crowd held its breath as the 14 bis accelerated across the grass. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden lightness, the machine lifted off the ground and flew, truly flew, for more than 60 meters. The flight was short, but it was unmistakable, undeniable, and witnessed by members of the Aero Club de France, who certified the achievement on the spot. For the first time in human history, an aircraft had achieved a public, officially recorded, self-powered takeoff, flight, and landing. News spread across Europe and beyond. Newspapers proclaimed Santos Dumont as the pioneer who had finally made the dream of human flight real. His name appeared alongside the great inventors of the era, and photographs of the 14 bis circulated worldwide. The significance of his achievement lay not merely in the distance covered, but in the method. He had taken off without rails, catapults, or external assistance. In the eyes of the scientific community, this was the decisive proof that mechanical flight had been achieved. But Santos Dumont did not stop to celebrate. Just weeks later, he was already working on a new design, the Demoiselle, an ultralight aircraft that would become one of the earliest examples of a practical personal airplane. The Demoiselle featured a bamboo frame, a compact engine, and a configuration that resembled the basic layout of modern aircraft. More importantly, he made a bold and unprecedented decision. He released the design to the public, allowing anyone to build and modify it freely. At a time when most inventors protected their patents fiercely, Santos Dumont chose openness over competition. He believed aviation belonged to humanity, not to a select few. The Demoiselle would go on to inspire early aviators across Europe, influencing engineering approaches and accelerating the global development of flight. For many historians, it represents one of Santos Dumont's most important contributions, not just as an inventor, but as a visionary who believed in the democratization of technology. Yet even as he reached new heights, a profound shift was beginning within him. Fame had never been his goal, and the growing militarization of aviation troubled him deeply. He had always envisioned flight as a symbol of freedom, exploration, and the peaceful progress of humanity. But the world around him was changing, and the shadow of conflict would soon cast itself over the skies he helped open. As the first decade of the 20th century came to an end, Santos Dumont found himself celebrated on every continent. His achievements had reshaped the limits of engineering, inspired a generation of inventors, and defined an entirely new chapter in human history. Yet beneath this global recognition, a growing disquiet began to consume him, one that would eventually push him away from the world he had helped to transform. Aviation was advancing rapidly. What had once been a fragile dream was becoming an industry. Governments, seeing the strategic potential of flight, began funding research programs, establishing military aviation units, and redirecting technological progress towards warfare. Aircraft were now seen merely as symbols of innovation or exploration, but as tools of power. Santos Dumont watched these developments with increasing unease. He had dedicated his life to proving that humans could fly, but he had never imagined that his inventions might be used for destruction. His health began to decline as well. Years of inhaling gasoline fumes, exposure to harsh weather during tests, and the constant stress of engineering work started to take a visible toll. Friends noticed his fatigue, his tremors, and the sadness that seemed to grow behind his calm expression. When doctors diagnosed him with multiple health complications, he withdrew from public life and returned to Brazil, hoping to find peace in the land where his dreams had first taken shape. But Brazil, too, was changing. By the 1910s, aviation had spread domestically, and the world was marching towards the First World War. Reports of airplanes being used in combat devastated Santos Dumont. To him, flight had always represented the highest aspiration of humanity: freedom, creativity, boundless potential. Seeing it transformed into an instrument of conflict was a wound he could not ignore. Still, the people of Brazil welcomed him warmly. Wherever he went, he was recognized as a national hero, a visionary whose accomplishments had placed the country at the forefront of global innovation. Schools were named after him. Streets carried his name. Children learned about the 14 Bis as proudly as they learned about the nation's independence. Yet fame could not erase the internal torment caused by the militarization of his life's work. In his later years, Santos Dumont retreated into isolation, living quietly in small towns and staying away from the public spotlight. His mind, once overflowing with ideas and mechanical visions, was now consumed by anxiety and melancholy. The world admired him, but he struggled to reconcile his achievements with the changing reality around him.
Despite his personal suffering, his legacy only grew. Engineers continue to study his designs. Aviation clubs honored his contributions. And as the 20th century unfolded, with commercial flight, international travel, and space exploration, historians looked back to the moment when, in 1906, the 14 Bis rose from the grass fields of Paris and proved that powered flight was possible. Today, Santos Dumont stands as one of the most influential inventors in human history. His courage, creativity, and generosity shaped not just the trajectory of aviation, but the very way the world approaches innovation itself. He worked with transparency, shared his ideas freely, and believed that technology should elevate all humanity, not divide it. More than a century after his historic flights, the skies remain filled with reminders of his genius. Every aircraft that lifts off, every airport built, every journey across continents carries echoes of the young Brazilian boy who once watched birds in the fields of Minas Gerais and wondered what it would feel like to join them. Santos Dumont did not simply create machines. He opened the skies, and in doing so, he changed the destiny of the world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Santos Dumont, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow for more historical stories to improve your English.